Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm super excited today because A, it's alive, B, I'm going to be speaking to another human being rather than just many people around the world that I can't see. So that's great. And we're going to be learning about experiences to do with the beginning of the war, to do with experiences right now, and all things in between. I've also um, potentially got time. We'll see how it goes for some general chat about the war with Matthew, my guest as well. So, without further ado, let me introduce my guest, and he can then introduce himself properly. So, Matt Bishop, Matthew, is here joining me from Perth in Australia. So it is evening time there. It's lunchtime here, and all different times, no matter where you are around the world. He is a subscriber to the channel, a member of the channel, really great supporter, but also has that connection to the very subject we talk about, intimate connection. And we're going to get to know about him and his experiences. So, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and why we're speaking?
Okay, yeah, my name's Matt. I'm English born, Australian raised, and then lived in Ukraine for 10 years with a about 2 year break in between. I've got a Ukrainian wife, engineer by trade, but work as a programmer, and I'm a pretty normal person. Oh, and look, there's Sour. Hi, Sour. I always say hello. And my nickname in the channel is Saber Inc. If anyone hasn't tweaked. So, yep.
Yeah, so you engineered, you moved over, did you move over to Ukraine originally 10 years ago for work purposes?
No. Bit more of a tragic note. My twin sister passed away, and I spent a year out of sorts, and basically decided I wanted out of the rat race. That's the best way to describe it. And ended up in Ukraine, not speaking a word of the language, Ukrainian or Russian. And it was a very interesting time.
Why?
So,
Okay, talk to me about that. Why was it an interesting time?
oh, just everything from trying to get Australian money changed where they uh, actually faxed um, banknotes to the banker, to the Reserve Bank of Kiev or the Central Bank of Kiev, to see if they were actual, it was actual real money. Because of course we had the polymer plastic notes, and no one else in the world did at that point. And they're going, "It's not real money," and I'm going, "Well, yes, it is." And they managed to find someone who spoke some broken English, and we're trying to have this conversation. It was just absolutely hilarious, and I was in this little bank, and there was a whole pile of babushkas and that, and it was really almost surreal because it was like, oh, there's a Westerner in our bank, and they're looking, and you can see them commenting, and I've got curly hair, which isn't a thing in Ukraine. They're all almost all straight hair,
Really
and
interesting.
it's longer. It was little bit longer then, but still, as a male in Ukraine at the time, hair was usually about 3 millimeters long. So it's like this completely almost alien standing there in a bank, and people are just going, um, "Oh, thanks, Al." Um, yeah, it was just this. You felt like an animal in a zoo almost. Um, so yeah,
And
it was.
had you decided where you were in Ukraine, kind of finding your feet, I guess.
Yeah.
Had you thought, right, I'm gonna go? Did you sort of move around to different places before settling down on Kharkiv?
Well, we went. I was in Kiev first. Went down to Uman, um, back to Kiev. Settled down in Kiev for 3 years. Then moved out to Irpin. Um, which since then I've seen, like, the apartment building that we had there, that's been flattened, or nigh on flattened or something like that. That was really sad because that was new development and really nice and everything, and that's gone. And of course, you can see, like, the bridge up by Erpen, where you saw the bridge and all the media reports where the civilians were trying to flee. Well, that
Mm,
was the bridge we went over every day to get in and out of Kiev, and it's, you've got this kind of footage coming back that's just making you go, what
yeah,
this
yeah,
is this
yeah,
is you know your brain has problems processing that aspect of it. you
yeah,
know um,
absolutely.
and
And
then oh, sorry, yeah.
no, 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 carry on.
I was going to say, then with the conflict over east, in the east of the country, we had a whole pile of internal immigrants, um, and the crime rate went through the roof.
Right.
Obviously, when you've got 2 million people moving, they've got families to feed, they don't have a job, they've lost their home, they've still got a family to feed. Crime rate goes up.
Yeah,
That's the reality of life. I know people say I'm a good person, I wouldn't steal. Well, if your family's starving, you steal. There's a practical aspect to life. So at that point, I thought, yeah, it's probably getting a little bit too dangerous. I'll come back to Australia. And when I say that, in Ukraine, I've never been threatened, never been called derogatory names or felt intimidated or anything like that. I've got memories of walking through the streets of Kiev at 2 or 3 in the morning trying to find cigarettes, um, and having the local alcoholics offering to give me cigarettes rather than beat me up and rob me, as happens in most places. Oh, come and join us by the fire, because they're standing on the street with a little drum kind of thing with a fire going in it, and just drinking cheap vodka and talking. So there was never this feeling of hatred, and I think that goes a long way. Like when I hear Moscow saying about the Ukrainian Nazis, I always think, well, they've got to be the most inefficient Nazis in the world, because for 10 years I lived in Ukraine with this curly hair, which just at 100 meters you can tell I'm not Ukrainian, and they never beat me up. They never robbed me. They never did anything. Um, so you think, well, just how inefficient are these Nazis? They must be really pathetic. Um, so yeah, I came back to Australia. Then my nan was dying in England, so I went over to see her. Then went over to Ukraine for a conference, met a girl, and decided I liked her. We got married 9 months later, I think it was. And then she lived in Kharkiv, so I moved up to Kharkiv. So that's the story.
that's the story, and then here you are now. So thank you so much,
Oh,
Lawrence. Nice
well, thanks,
flag in
Lauren.
the background there.
Yes.
It's to cover up a picture that would otherwise reflect. So he's given us a special flag for today's video, which is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. Stole
But
it. Stole it out of my son's room. So.
right.
Yeah.
So thanks, Lawrence. I really appreciate that. So okay, you're in Kharkiv now. You've
Mhm.
got a wife, not a child yet, I presume. So
No. Sorry. My son's my stepson, or as I like to call
right,
him,
okay,
my bonus son, because I think
yeah,
that I hate that step word.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
kind of
Nice,
minimalizes your experience with
yeah.
your child. So yeah.
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 Oh, brilliant. So you're living in Kharkiv together as a three, and then let's sort of forward wind to, I guess,
Mhm.
early 2022, right? And
Okay.
before we start thinking about uh, the Russian invasion, what was
Mhm.
your experience of what people, particularly in Kharkiv, because Kharkiv is an interesting city, and
Yeah.
let's kind of bring that up for a start. Let's add this map, which is your escape route, and we'll come to
Yeah.
that later.
Yeah.
But you're in Perth now at the moment in Western
Yep.
Australia, and
Yep. Down
we'll
there.
talk about we're down there, yeah, somewhere down there. We're going to talk about Ukraine, obs, and we're going to go to Kharkiv. Now, Kharkiv is an interesting place because of its proximity to the Russian border, to the
Mhm.
Belgorod Oblast, and therefore it's kind of seen because as a result, it has quite a lot of Russian spoken there, or
Yeah.
certainly did historically. And this is why you hear of people saying, "Oh, that's a Russian city," and you're going to give us an anecdote,
Mm.
I guess, on that soon. But you would imagine, and I think the Russians did imagine, that there would be so much sympathy in Kharkiv that actually it would easily come under the influence of the army as it came in. But before we get to that point, what was your experience of people who lived in Kharkiv and how they viewed Russia and Russian culture?
Okay, so this one is always something that I've never quite understood with my wife. So when I first met her, she's proudly Ukrainian, but very sympathetic to Russian. She worked in Russia for 10 years. She's a, oh dear, high energy plasma engineer or something. She's the smart one, you
I love
know.
it, or something. Should I?
Something like that. Way beyond my intelligence level. Um, so she'd worked in Russia. Russian's her first language. In fact, she knew very little Ukrainian. Um, Everyone around us spoke Russian. Actually, funnily enough, Russian or English, because we lived in an
Mm.
area populated with a lot of engineers and a lot of programmers. Yeah, I've got some funny stories on that. I'm not sure if we'll ever have time, but got some great stories on that. Um, so everyone spoke Russian or English, as I said. Everywhere was almost everywhere you looked was actually, funny enough, English language schools. And I was once questioned in a government building, actually, when they changed the laws about having to do your paperwork in Ukrainian, and they were saying, they were speaking to me in Ukrainian, and I'm like, well, I don't know enough of it to have this conversation. They're like, why not? And I said, well, I'm a foreigner. Where do I learn Ukrainian? There's not a single Ukrainian language school in Kharkiv. And in which case the lady just looked at me and went, what am I meant to say to that? Um, so yeah, you
Not
could.
because of your wife that I presume you were conversant in Russian or learning Russian. Is that right? Or
Yeah, so we spoke. I spoke passable Russian. Yeah, yeah. Reading Russian was a lot harder. Um, Spoke partial Ukrainian. When you're in Kiev, there's a lot more mixture between the languages, and funnily enough, in the middle of a single sentence, they can change between Ukrainian and Russian. Then when you go a lot more west, it's a lot more Ukrainian or whatever.
yeah,
That said, remember holidaying in Lviv, um, and asking if we could speak Russian because we found it easier, and they looked at us like, well, "Why couldn't you speak Russian?"
yeah.
And funnily enough, it was a comment of, why wouldn't you? Do you believe that Russian lies that we beat up Russian speakers, and we're like,
Well, it's just
yeah,
something I wanted
you
to
know.
ask you a bit later, actually, and maybe we'll come on to this later. But your experience of Russian disinformation before the war, actually. But we'll come on to
Mm.
that. Yeah, the idea of Kharkiv as a place of Russian sympathy, right? Continue.
Yeah, it was definitely sympathetic towards Russian. However, if you remember the Maidan and what happened after Maidan, um, the Russians, pro-Russian separatists, did try to take Kharkiv.
Yeah,
And at the point, funnily enough, for me, my memory of it is the point that they said no was there was video footage of a babushka talking to one of these men, and he pushed her down the stairs, going into the metro or underground, as you'd call it in the UK, or you know.
yeah.
Subway in America, pushed her down the stairs, and she was critical in hospital. And that was actually the tipping point. The people
Wow.
from Kharkiv just said, "Well, no, you don't beat up little old ladies. You don't throw them down, 2 flights of stairs." So before that, there was kind of like a, meh, the authorities will fix it. After that, it was no, 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 no. We're not going down that path. We're not cheapening the value of life. That's the way I'd interpret it. Um, So whilst it was a pro-Russian city in some regards, as it spoke Russian, in the street, you didn't find much pro-Russians. Now, you had Russian people living there, and most of them had left Russia, and as they'd say, left Russia for a reason. We
Right.
don't want to live in Russia.
Yeah.
That might be our heritage or something like that, but we come to Ukraine and no one's persecuting us for what we say or think. Or at least not to that limitation, not to the same level as it is in Russia. Everyone gets persecuted somewhat by our governments. Um, so life was pretty good in Kharkiv. Of course, we had 2 years of COVID, which messed things up a lot, but it's a lovely, lovely city. It's a city of universities. I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think it was 47 universities in Kharkiv, which is quite amazing. It's a city of 2 million people. And we had people coming to Kharkiv from all around the world. Our building actually had some guys from Africa, and unfortunately, I never found out where in Africa they were from. We had Pakistanis down the road. We had some Indians going the other direction. There were just people from everywhere. It was a multicultural society. Now, we were in the university district, um, but it was, yeah, really amazing um, area to live in, and quite beautiful if you ignore monuments and things like that. The old USSR thing of a wide road with a big green, I don't know the right word for it. Green area in between the road
Yeah.
and the road on the other side, and trees running down each side of the road, and then you had your apartment blocks. Um, but you had,
And
yeah, yeah. Sorry.
I was just, I guess it shows that there is this disconnect between sort of language and culture, and otherwise sympathy, you know, for Russia in terms of real nominal sympathy and actual
Mm,
true feelings towards Russia. So there, it
yeah,
sounds like a bit of a melting pot of a city, that those who were Russian weren't necessarily the biggest fans of Putin, and then
yeah.
there were the feelings that have been stoked since 2014, but I guess it's very different to being somewhat uh, pro-Russian in terms of some sentiments you might have, and then wondering how you might react if a Russian army invades, and then that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Whole different thing. Yeah, yeah. And you know, uh, I see it a lot. Or no, I'm not see it a lot. I think about it a lot of the stupidity of war. If you took the money that Russia had invested in its military, and it had actually used that money to build up the cities around the border of Ukraine and make them look beautiful, then the Ukrainians would have been looking over the border going, "Hey, we want to be there."
Yeah, interesting.
Instead, it spends all that money on weapons of war, whilst you've got Russian villages without gas in some of them, or there was one interview I was watching where a guy was really happy because his village was going to get gas next year. And the Ukrainian guy who was interviewing him was like, "What do you mean your village doesn't have gas? You ship it out around the world, but you don't give it to your own people." Which
Yeah,
was, this
interesting.
this confused aspect of it. And of course, you don't know what's right and what's wrong. Um, when you hear those stories, but yeah, I always think it's the same with China and Taiwan type situation. Well, make it so lovely a place. China's such a lovely place that Taiwan wants to be part of you again.
And that's
It's going
interesting.
to be
Well, yeah,
cheaper.
that's
you
interesting
know
because actually that is one of the theories as to what the threat was of Ukraine in the first place, right? So
Mhm.
let's just go back to the map here. So when you've got a somewhat functioning democracy that is flirting with joining the EU, that is having elections with a peaceful transfer of power to some degree, Euromaidan aside and issues
Mhm.
surrounding that, but certainly before that, and when
That was
you
still a peaceful transfer of power. I've
yeah
I've got stories. I was there for Maidan as well, so I've got great
yeah
stories on that one. But yeah, it still was peaceful.
Yeah, yeah. So the point
Yeah.
being that when you're Russia and you have over here, I mean, there's a lot that's been written on this, and I've read about this, about how really one of the big threats was this kind of like, I don't want our people in Russia to see what they could have. And it's the idea that
Yeah.
these Ukrainians are basically a threat to us by having a functioning society with democratic values that we don't have, and therefore people are going to be looking over the fence with green eyes, thinking, this is what we could have. Why don't we have that?
I think it's more the interplay, okay? Because whilst Ukraine was definitely moving to slowly towards a really fully functional democracy,
Mm,
um, and I say that in the context of whilst after Maidan, it was definitely okay. If you look at the politics before that, there's a lot of shady stuff that went on with poisoning of political candidates and things like that.
mm.
And you think, wow, okay. Um, but the really interesting thing for me, and I'm hoping I'm remembering this correctly, is the average income in Ukraine was now higher than the average income in Russia. And so you've got this linking of
Yeah.
democracy, better standard of living kind of thing. And that's where they interweave into the same thing. And so, you know, um, and again, it's a statistic I just read. I honestly have no idea if it's true or not, but um, there was a statistic that one third of all mobile apps were now being written or tested or whatever. Part of the process was actually done in Ukraine, um, and you couldn't throw a stone without hitting a programmer. Um,
Yeah.
you know, so it was becoming more wealthy as a country, and democracy meant that everyone had a chance of improving their life little bit by little bit. Now, there were still massive problems. The biggest one thrown out there were is normally corruption. That's
Yeah.
the everyone says
Well, I
Ukraine's
was going to
corrupt.
ask you, yeah,
Yeah.
how has Ukraine changed over the time you've experienced Ukraine in
Oh.
terms of its culture, in terms of corruption, in terms of all these talking points that we hear from the pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin, those narratives that they
Mhm.
throw out there? How have you experienced change?
Right. So this could get me in trouble with the federal police, but I'll say it anyway. Uh, some countries you go to, you put $20 in your passport, right? And every time the police come and ask you for your ID, the 20 disappears. You put another 20 in. You have a nice life.
Right.
Okay. That's the way it is in some countries. And whilst we live in a country like Australia or England, and we can say that's terrible, it's like, well, yeah, it is, but being locked up in a prison cell for a week is a lot worse. So go with it. Again, there's a practicality of life. It's easy to sit and judge when we have these nice homes. Um, However, after Maidan, there was the new police introduced in Ukraine, um, and they okay. So I've heard some rumors that some of them took bribes, but 99% of them definitely not. They were a lot more helpful. They were a lot more polite. They were much more like you'd find in a UK, Australia police force. Yeah, so the corruption was going. No longer when I first went to Ukraine and I set up a business, I remember my lawyer giving me a list of presents, um, which incredibly funny things like a perfume, a bottle of scotch. These were the presents that people wanted to process the paperwork. Um, that's the way business is done. That's the way business is done. There's an old, and I'm not sure if Ukrainian or USSR curse, but it's may you only have one income. Um,
Right. Okay.
so
Interesting. I like that. Yeah.
yeah, that
That's
tells you the corruption level. But then you know all our Western countries, we still have a massive amount of corruption as well. It's just that our governments legalize it.
yeah.
Whether it's
Yeah. Don't get me
whichever
started
way it is.
because this would be
Exactly.
in danger of going off on a tangent. But you're absolutely right. I've written an article on how lobbying is broadly legalized corruption. It's
Yes.
quid
Oh,
pro
100%.
quo. It's like so, but in the US and to some degree in the UK, you can go along and say, "Here's $100,000." Oh, I don't want anything back. It's like when they're
Exactly.
voting. It's
Yeah.
it's really easy to judge other nations, but overlook our own kind of
Mm. Well,
issues
it's
that
it's
we might
just
have. But
just for me, it's really interesting that for it to be corruption, you have to have a law against it. Well, we've
right,
removed the laws against it.
yeah,
We've
yeah, yeah.
given business avenues to do it, so it's not corruption, and that's the actual stupidity of the situation. But yes, that's a tangent, so we won't go down there.
Yes,
Um, so ignoring that aspect of it, yeah, in the last 5 6 years, you wouldn't have even thought about offering to give money.
yeah,
When I first met or I'd met my wife, we come back to Kiev, and we met up there, and we were getting to know each other properly as a start of a dating relationship. And the second day, she actually fell off her push bike, cracked her skull, and spent the next month in hospital. Yeah,
jeez,
don't even get me started on that one. Absolute horror story. Um, but there was a couple of really interesting bits that happened for us, which was when we got to uh, the doctor in the hospital, and we went to give him a bit of extra money. He just went no. And if any of my nurses ask for extra money, or any of the other doctors, tell me. We don't do it that
nice,
way anymore, you know.
good, yeah.
And he was
And
an
that's the
awesome
way
guy.
it's got. That's the way it's got to be because the whole idea about accession to the EU, about getting into NATO, about getting money
Mm,
from the IMF, the strings attached are we will do
yeah,
that and you will get money. It's not. It's not. Yes, it's a case of doing that because it's morally right or it's better or because I feel good about myself, but the sheer practicality of it is if you
yeah,
don't sort corruption out, your future is in jeopardy. Like all these things you want access to the EU, to be in the EU, to be in NATO, and to be this western facing nation, you need to jump a bunch of hoops, and those hoops are
yeah.
transparency and a lack of corruption. And so therefore it's in really you just got to do it, Ukraine,
Mm,
and they are doing that, and they are making those steps towards,
yeah.
moving up the transparency
And
index.
look, I've got to say on this one, and I've had this conversation actually with a lot of Ukrainians, where they get frustrated that there's still corruption in their system, and I say, but it takes time. And I say that with the Westerners and all that as well, but people don't generally understand. It's not like you can flick a switch. So
Yeah,
you've got
right.
you've got the first of all, you've got the way that people have been brought up. But when we say, okay, so the police were a good example. The police were, and I don't know what they're getting now, but the old police were only getting 350 US a month. I'm sorry, can you live on 350 US a month?
Mm,
The train workers, which we applaud, um, for what they're doing right now during the war, they, if I remember, and I remember correctly, just before we left, there was a lot going through the news that they were really upset because they're still only getting 350 a month. Well,
yeah,
how are they meant to live on that? So there's this whole thing of actually bringing up people's wages, the people that are taking the payments, because part of your society is making more money, and so they've got to pay their taxes so we can actually bring up the private sector so we get rid of corruption.
yeah.
Kind of lag process that
Yeah, it
happens
is.
there.
You're right. It's not just flicking a switch. I remember reading earlier on in this war something about the American military when they were particularly, well, not particularly corrupt, but there was corruption within military procurement and logistics and all sorts, rather similar to what we learn about with the Russian setup.
Mm.
And someone was saying that actually it took decades and decades for the U.S.
Mm.
military to sort themselves out. So it's really like you get some people in the US, in UK, in France or Germany or wherever, like going, oh, they should sort this out. They need to do this. Oh, it's so corrupt. Or those that maybe are trying to side with Putin, going, they're so corrupt. It's
Mm.
like you can't turn that off, and that is decades. Look, it took America decades, and any nation where we've all had corruption in our pasts, in our
Mm,
nations for sure. It
yeah,
takes a long time to fix those endemic issues that are kind of in the
mm,
DNA to some extent, to kind of
yeah,
to generationally kind of breed that out, I suppose. But yeah,
yeah. And look, there's something in Ukraine called a private entrepreneur, which is a problem.
if you
Yeah.
remember it, it's fine. So going back to uh, living in, we're still in just pre-war Kharkiv, okay, and
Mhm.
you are there. Do you have experience of Russian disinformation at that point? Do you get do you, I don't understand,
Mm,
like I don't have no experience of living somewhere like that. Are you getting Russian TV? Do you have people
yes.
that are receiving narratives that are problematic?
Yeah, look, okay, so we had like my, I don't know if it's a word, aunt-in-law, my wife's aunt.
Yeah.
She's uh grew up in the USSR. She was very pro strong figures. She loved Boris Johnson. Um, she loved Donald Trump. She loved Putin. And I've got to say, if you're in that category of people, what the hell are you doing wrong? But she loved men like that, right? So she was pro Russia. Um, but kind of thankfully, she actually passed away from cancer before the invasion. We're
Right.
quite lucky in that regard because we wouldn't have been able to care for her to
Mm,
get her out.
yeah.
So yeah. So you had the pro-Russian thing. We had um, some pro-Russian TV channels. When they got too overt, they generally got turned off by Ukraine. And when I say too overt, um, it's literally a Russian person saying, we should invade Ukraine, we should kill Ukrainians. They're not real people. That's a that's pretty,
Well, pretty
horrific to
hate
hear.
speechy, kind of pretty
Yeah,
genocidal. Maybe we shouldn't allow them to say that to the general public. Yeah,
yeah, that's just not what you want children to hear, because of course
yeah,
children can turn on these channels. I
yeah,
think that's one of the things we always forget is you don't know what your actual audience is.
yeah.
Um, so there's that. But there was a I'm going to say the general attitude is people didn't have an issue with Russia. We had a There was an issue, of course, that there was an ongoing war in Ukraine. But that had
But it's interesting because I was speaking to a previous live stream guest, Valeria, who
Yeah,
was living in Ukraine, and she now runs Country of Peace, a
I saw that
charity.
one. Yep.
But she was saying just really interesting things like that was happening over there. Like it's in her own country, and that was happening over there, and it didn't
Yeah.
like hit home with me. It wasn't. So it's almost like
Yeah.
Ukraine's a really big country, and even though it's at war, it's like it's not really affecting the whole country, and it's more kind
Well,
of localized.
yeah, and this is the interesting thing. I mean, whilst the pro-Russians like to say Ukraine bombed Donbass for 8 years,
8 years, yeah, that
you
classic.
know, that's the classic, and it's like, well, first of all, you know, it's not the Donbass. It's not even half of the Donbass. So, you saying it's the Donbass is wrong. You know, just to start
Good
off
point.
with. Um, but you're going, well, in the last year, I think it was 24 casualties. So we've gone from 24. I don't even count the numbers anymore, but we must be getting up to 500,000, 600,000 casualties in there.
Right across, yeah,
Yeah, right across. So just stop and think. We've gone from 24 to 600,000.
yeah,
There must have been another way we could have solved the 24 fatalities a
yeah,
year. Um, and look, of course, you get the pro-Russians again saying, look, it was an insurrection that happened in response to Maidan or something like that. It's like, no, people forget, Crimea Duma was taken at gunpoint. But if you go back to that time, it was armed men had taken control of their parliament. you know People were shot, or one person was shot. um you know so you had that aspect of it, which is completely glossed over, whereas when you had Maidan, no, there was no gunfire in the parliament or anything like that. um Don't get me wrong, there was definitely gunfire at
Yeah,
Maidan,
yeah, yeah.
and scary situation to be living in Kiev during that time. Um, but it just wasn't the same. Maidan was people firstly objecting to school kids getting beaten up. That's how it started. It wasn't this big pro EU kind of thing. That was the reason why the students were protesting. But people were really angry that their kids, 17, 18-year-old kids, were just absolutely trashed by the police. Late one night, and you can see the video footage of it on YouTube or whatever. And so there's a difference there. But when you go to the east of Ukraine, you've got the fact that the Ukrainian army wasn't even deployed there to stop this insurrection for 2 months. Whereas the Russians like to say the Ukrainian army did this or something. They weren't even there for 2 months. They were desperately because Yanukovych had basically cannibalized the army. Almost everything had gone to storage. They'd stopped conscription. The army was becoming rotten from the inside, or more rotten. They didn't have a force, which is, of course, why you get the Azov regiment. The birth of that, is the fact that they were just some people saying, no, 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 you can't invade our country. Because we all know,
Yeah.
I mean, Putin admitted, uh, with all the pro-Russians, Putin's already said, he authorized special forces to go into Crimea.
Yeah. It was an
But
illegal war. It was
yeah,
an invasion. End
it
of.
was an
So,
invasion. End of.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. So,
But yeah, look, in Kharkiv, we're not far from where the war was going on, and it was just like it was another world. It
yeah.
really was. There wasn't. Yeah, so if you bring up the map, you can see it's it's not far at all, really.
No.
Um, and
So,
I've got to be honest, when I first went there, I was actually concerned about being that close to um, where the action was, as such.
yeah. So now talk us through what was going through your mind and the minds of
Okay,
people
sorry.
you
Mm,
knew in terms of uh, the just before the kind of war started. So you're talking
right.
January, February 2022,
Yeah.
perhaps winter
Well, we
2021,
go.
where
Yeah, we actually go back to October, November when the
yeah,
Russians started getting up on the border, um, and we were a bit worried at that point. Um, but then they backed down, they backed off, they said they were removing their troops. We were just doing some training exercises, everything's good. Um, and we went, okay. My wife had been in a traffic accident years before, and we decided, okay, let's take this opportunity for you to do a hip replacement operation. And so she actually went in for a hip replacement on uh, Christmas, either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, UK Christmas Eve, not
wow, yeah.
Eastern European. Um, so she had a hip replacement. So we felt safe enough at that point for her to go through major surgery, knowing that she wouldn't be walking for 2 months. Um, so there was a general feel of calm. Then the rhetoric started to pick up. Then I started getting emails from the Australian government saying, "Hey, Matt, we know you're in Ukraine. Maybe you should get out." Um, and I said, "Yep, would love to, but I've got my wife first of all, so I can't come to Australia. We don't have visas. So I've got to say." Yeah, kudos to the Australian government. They managed to process some visa requests pretty damn quickly.
Mm.
Um, then on the Monday, she was allowed to walk, um, and then we got invaded. We had actually made the decision.
I love that. On the Monday, she got out of hospital and she's walking, and on the Tuesday we're invaded. So,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
right, yeah,
Tuesday was it? Hang on, was it Wednesday or? Wednesday we were invaded or whatever. It was really weird. But we'd actually decided that we were going to go,
Mm,
and we'd booked the train tickets from Kharkiv to Lviv, because my son's biological father was over that way doing work. So I kind of said, look, I want him to be able to spend 2 weeks with him before we leave, because to be honest, it's look, you got to say hats off to the guy. He loves his son very much, and he understood that his son's going overseas, and it's going to be a long time before he sees his son again.
mm,
You
yeah.
got to commend that as a as a father. You got to say that takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. Um, so we'd planned that. We'd packed half of our suitcases. My wife's friends had come around to say goodbye. Um,
And is this all before there's anything landing around Kharkiv? So this
yeah,
is
this is the night before.
right.
So we got half the suitcases packed and all that. We went to bed, and strangely, I actually went to bed early. I normally go to bed late at night. I like to do my work late at night when the house is quiet. So I actually missed Putin declaring war. So we woke up to Russian missiles hitting the city.
Wow.
Um, then the phone started ringing. Um, my brother and sister-in-law, who were saying, are you hearing that kind of thing? Um, they said we can't see anything from our place. So I went out, had a look. You could start to see the fires and that, and it's just like, yep, time to go, time to go. So we had 30 minutes, I think it was, to finish packing. Yeah. Mm, those are great memories. Um,
Yeah.
um, yeah, we had 30 minutes to pack. Jumped in the cars. There was a lot of other people in our building. You're trying to say hurried goodbyes, good luck. Lots of people just in tears. Of course, how did it come to this? Um,
Was there a
and
lot of was there a lot of sort of palpable anger? I mean, of course there must have been, right? I mean, I
at that
presume.
point, you might have heard some expletives, but I got to say, everyone was just scared.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're civilians, we're not soldiers,
Yeah.
and when you suddenly see just parts of the city exploding and you haven't experienced that before,
Yeah.
you're just scared. I mean, I know we all like to think we could be like, you know, Liam Nielsen or something like that, and go out and kill 50 guys to save our daughters or something like this. The reality is you're scared and you're just trying to remember not to piss yourself.
Yeah.
Um, that's your first hour of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I remember saying to my son at one point in there, he was really panicking, and I said, "Look, the only time you need to panic is if I pull out a smoke and have a smoke, because I vape normally, but I keep a packet of cigarettes because I always have a last cigarette before I fly because I don't like flying. Um, Call it an old habit, but So I said, if you see me pull out a smoke, that's the time to be scared. And strangely, that line worked for him and pulled him out of the scared bit. Okay, you know, Matt's not scared. I'm okay, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, so we jumped in the cars, drove out of Kharkiv.
And just as you do it, just on that note, I mean, obviously, a lot
Mhm.
of people stayed in Kharkiv,
Oh
and
yeah,
you were able to get out quite quickly.
yeah.
Would
We're You can see up there. I'm not going to say the suburb, but we're close to the exit of the city, the ring road that goes around Kharkiv. So it was pretty easy for us to get out. In saying that, it's pretty good because an hour after we drove through there, Russian special forces were there.
Really?
Um,
Goodness. So,
mm,
I mean, there's a lot of talk about the people who remain. Oh, Kharkiv's going to be a different experience because of the size of the city. But some of these
yeah.
smaller places that you see on the front line, you hear about these tiny villages or smaller towns, like Bakhmut, even. Like the people
Mm.
who remained in Bakhmut are the most vulnerable, the oldest, the people
Well,
least likely to be able to escape, so on and so forth.
just on that point, I mean, we actually got my stepfather out of Ukraine. We got him here to Australia with us, and he actually went back. Um, and you can kind of understand. He's the two people he's loved in his life, his wife and his long-term partner or whatever, they're both buried there. His parents are buried there. He doesn't speak English beyond, hello, how are
Mm,
you kind of thing. Um, and he's back there now, and so you live up with that. You wake up every morning going, well, are we going to get that message? We've still got friends that have decided to stay there. Um,
yeah. Yeah,
and you're
that
waiting for that message. That that
it's easy to say uproot your life, go and live somewhere else. When if you're someone who's lived in a particular place for all your life, your identity is mixed up with that place. Your everything about who you are, your all
everything.
your
Well,
connections, and then you're like, right. So even to go from somewhere like there to Lviv, that you might think, oh, that's easy. For some people, that's really
mm,
difficult. Or even to move from a place, I don't know, from Bakhmut to I don't know, to Zaporizhia or Bakhmut to Pavlohrad or somewhere like that. You're
well,
like, that is
there's
a big
the
thing for a lot of people.
there's the practicality of it as well, that people really don't forget. So you spend years of your life setting up your home, whether it's buying it, paying off a mortgage, right? When you walk away from that, you've walked away from your life's biggest asset.
Yeah,
And um, with Ukraine now, like for us, we can only get $1,000 a month out of our bank accounts in Ukraine. We can't sell our properties in Ukraine. We tried to have a conversation with the banks here, so we could get a mortgage here, and we got laughed at multiple banks. And you sit there going, you're trying to rebuild your life. We're both, employed. All through this, I've got to say, our employers have been wonderful and understanding. No one expected me to log in and do work on the days we were running away, so that was pretty good of them. um, but there's the aspect of most people don't have the money needed to set up again.
yeah,
It
yeah.
it's hugely expensive, and I really, we've been setting up this house again here, and a year later we still don't even have half the stuff that we need, and we've been getting a whole pile of secondhand stuff.
Mm,
um, there's no idea of, oh, we've got to buy new leather couches or something like that. It's like, no, 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 the couches we've got out there are 20 years old, with rips down them or something like that, and that's the reality of life. There's more important areas to spend the money on,
yeah,
at this stage of the game. So it's not that easy to just pick up and move, and especially, we're talking to well paid uh, professionals. Well, most of these people aren't like that, or
yeah.
they're
It's a
60,
really good
70
point.
years old. They don't have an income.
Yeah,
They've got a pension which is designed for you to live off, not for you to set
yeah,
up a life off. Um, so it is, yeah, very difficult for people to be able to pick up and move. And sometimes, you also look at the other aspect of it. You know, when they sit there going, well, I'm 70, I've got all these health problems, you know, um, maybe it's better if a bomb just hits me, you know, that
yeah.
aspect of it
Goodness.
is in there as well. And I think that, my stepfather's kind of got that thing. He's, as a normal gentleman, he's, in his 70s, he's got his high blood pressure, he's on his medication, life's not particularly wonderful. He's already buried, as I said, two people that he loves. Um, Not much left for him to live for. Well, maybe it's just easier in his mind to stay there and take his chances rather than try and start again. It takes huge mental fortitude to start again. And we've got friends in France and Canada and Germany, in Poland, everywhere around the world, and they're all struggling. You know, every single one of them's finding it difficult, as you'd expect. They're starting again, and it's really easy for us, as again sitting in our nice houses, to sit there and say, this about refugees or that about refugees or something like this. But the important thing is to remember is people wouldn't make these journeys if they had a choice.
Yeah.
If they had a choice to live there, they'd stay there. They were completely happy before
Do you know what I saw?
they were invaded.
I'm going to find this actually. So I'm going to find an image just on
Mm.
that note. It's actually to do with what's happening in Rhodes, an island in the Mediterranean at the moment.
Mhm.
But
I
do you
know
want to
where it is.
just yeah, yeah? Do you want to just talk us through like
Yes.
so you chose then to go obviously eventually to Romania. What was going through your minds in
Right.
going that
So
way?
this is what I like to think of a funny story. So we knew the Russians were invading. We didn't know where. Um, then my mother in Australia gets on Telegram. Obviously, as a mum, panic, panic. And I said, look, and she's telling us what's going on. She's getting it off of Twitter. And I mean, if anyone
I
ever
think
finds
I
my
think you'll find it's called X. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
carry
X
on.
now. Yeah, anyone ever finds my Twitter account, they'll actually see that I only joined after the invasion, because that was the best source of information. But my mum was sitting in Australia giving us updates on the invasion that she was getting via Twitter. So we were originally going to go swing over the top of Kiev. But of course, then we heard they were pushing down that way.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so then we decided we were going to go under, and I can't explain the panic that you actually had at that point, knowing that you had a Russian tank column coming north and south, and you knew they were going for Kiev, and you're thinking, right, we've got 500 kilometers to cover to beat this tank column, and we're not on the best roads. I mean, everyone's heard of just how bad some of the roads in Ukraine are. But we were even driving down dirt tracks, because again, I think there was some comment once a while ago about why the Russians aren't hitting the bridges over the river there. Um, and I was doing that as we were actually driving across the bridges, thinking, well, when's the cruise missiles going to hit?
Mm.
Because you're fully expecting the bridges to be taken out. From a military sense, that would have been, cut off half of Ukraine kind of thing, take out a few bridges. So we were driving over these bridges thinking, yeah, you can imagine what we were thinking.
Mm.
And I couldn't believe that we'd actually gotten across the bridge when we crossed it. I remember actually looking back and just thinking, how's that bridge still standing? How hasn't it been hit yet? Um, so there was panic there.
And this is, I mean, the idea here is you are now an internally displaced person. You are a
Yeah.
refugee. What I was going to share it was this, and this is, Rhodes as a tourist destination is on fire, right, at the
Yeah.
moment, and there are like 19,000 people being evacuated. It's all gone absolutely nuts. My
Hmm.
fellow European, says this person, maybe now you understand how easily common people can turn into refugees. Spot the difference. So, when as Europeans, when we've seen refugees from Syria and you think, oh my goodness, shut the doors to Europe, or we can't let, and then you see,
Mm.
oh, European refugees from a like a fire on a tourist island, very sort of,
Yeah.
you know, different context, but actually how easy. The claim. What's the claim? It's you're only ever one car crash away from losing your job. From losing
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And we are so we live quite often very precarious lives, but we never realize how precarious they are. And take
Yep.
yourself in Ukraine, where a couple of years before, this was never on the agenda. This is never
No.
on your radar, and then suddenly you are an internally displaced person driving across a bridge, thinking, "Am I going to get blown up by driving across this bridge?" And
Well, what
this is
you
how
what
things
you
change. Plus, ça change.
what you are is a shit scared parent,
Mm,
wondering how the hell you're going to protect your child.
mm.
And that is just, and you saw that, and I'll go into that later on. Oh, dear, we've already gone for an hour. I should hurry up and
Yeah,
get
yeah,
onto
yeah.
that.
We'll probably have a part two, mate. So don't worry.
Um, and so yeah, we drove. If I remember correctly, it was 18 hours and 55 minutes it took us to get to the border. It was the Australian government who were telling us to go there because they had a person there. um, and I'm quite bitter about this. I've never, even to this day, had a phone call, a SMS, an email, anything from the UK government, who knew I was in Ukraine, especially because I just had my passport renewed a couple of, I think, 2 months before that or something. So they knew I was in Ukraine, and I've never had anyone from the UK government reach out to say, "Hey, Matt, did you get out of Ukraine all right?" Um, so that's for me is
Yeah,
always an
I,
interesting
I
one.
would love to. I would love to defend it. It's probably because they thought that you're a turncoat and become Australian, so they're just like, yeah, whatever. Uh,
I was 3.5 when I was sentenced here.
yeah, but actually, no. In all honesty, the UK, we were big on rhetoric at the beginning of the war. We were big on, yeah, we're gonna help refugees, but actually, we didn't front up much
Well,
organizational change, and it was a bit of a
when we
disaster.
crossed the border at Sirat, we ran into German delegates, French, and I think Belgium delegates there. Um, and I said, "Where's the UK guy?" And he's like, "They said some town." I'm like, "Where's that?" And they're like, "100 kilometers away." I'm like, "Why aren't they here?" And they're like,
Yeah,
"Ah, and this is the main border crossing. Why the hell weren't they there? There was plenty of English people coming through the border, I can tell you."
yeah,
But
interesting.
it's like, "Oh no, it's too cold for us to go out there." You know, I know
Yeah.
I'm being a bit nasty with it, but yeah. So
Well, it's an interesting point.
we had the Australian government telling us to go there because they're like, "Well, we've got consulate representatives on the border."
Yeah,
We went there, and we were also expecting the troops in Transnistria to invade as well. At all that point,
right.
everyone's well aware that there's Russian troops there. Why they didn't do anything, I have no idea. But there was. You can see by our route there as we come close to Moldova that there was definite panic, and there were lots of smaller roads we could have taken that would have saved us time, but we were trying to keep a bit of distance from the border. um, so yeah. So we got to Sirat border, or Syriat, or however it's pronounced. We took 3.5 days to travel. I think it was 18 kilometers. So
Really?
that's where the traffic line started, 18
Right.
kilometers away. And at that point, um, you realize it doesn't matter what country you're from, what color your skin is, what language you speak, anything like that. You understand everyone's afraid. Everyone just wants to live. There was some terrible scenes at the border, getting closer to the border. There was one where a lady was killed in a hit and run. In fact, if you zoom in, there's I love this. There's a petrol station called Wog, The Wog gas
Yeah.
station just there. Now, I love that just on the context. In Australia, it's a derogatory term for
Yeah.
Italians, Italians
Yeah.
and Greeks. I just used to spend my whole time when I was in Ukraine just going, and Wog was a Russian company, I believe, thinking, if you're going to name your company something, wouldn't you just do a search first to find out if it's a bad
Yeah.
word anywhere?
Yeah.
Um, but there was a lady who was killed in a hit and run there, as a convoy of four black SUVs just sped down the emergency stopping lane. Um, and eventually, they came in and took her body away in that. But the horrific thing is later on that day, you were driving through her blood, and
Yeah.
well, most of the time we were walking around the car, making sure nothing bad was happening, kind of thing. Um, Especially at night when people are trying to sleep, they've got young kids, they're trying to sleep. The queue would move 30 meters. So at that point, I'd usually do the shift from darkness until about 4 a.m., and then my wife would take over. And got to remember again, she's only just walking. Um,
Yeah.
and running past all the cars, knocking on the windows, waking people up so they can move their
Yeah.
cars forward, because people are trying to jump the queue any way they can.
Yeah.
At that point, we had another aspect people never think about is a lot of the people leaving were single mums. Of course, we all knew by that point Ukrainian men couldn't get out over the border. Um, Whether you want to say that's sexist or not, I know people have different points of view on that one. Um, but so you had mums with young kids in their car, but they can't leave their car to go to the toilet. So I was walking around the cars around us, offering, 20 minutes to get out of your car, run up, get some food, some drink, go to the toilet, whatever. I'll move your car up, and then I'd jump out of their car and I'd go and do the next car and the next car and the next car. Just trying to build a sense of community around us.
Mm.
Um, After about the second day of going through the border, we had a lot of people then starting to come in on foot. Um, so these people are completely exhausted. We're There's three service stations on the way to the border. They didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough water. Everyone's running out of everything at that point. And these poor people are trying to walk out of the country carrying a suitcase or something like that. And let's be honest, our Western lives don't prepare you for that.
Mm.
Um, and so, at that point, we were trying to uh, pick the people who were totally exhausted and just help them walk for a
Mm.
kilometer towards the border, kind of thing, carrying their luggage just so they could relax or something, and understand that there were still humans there. That we hadn't all become animals trying to
Yeah.
escape. Trying to get that touch of humanity. And I'll never forget one old man and his wife. I'd stopped to help them, and they were they must have been carrying all their life's belongings in these two huge bags. So I grabbed a huge bag off the guy, and he immediately takes the huge bag off of his wife. And I'm looking at him. His face is all white. It's like, you could see the heart rate going out of his neck. And I'm thinking, you're about to keel over, and here you are now taking a bag, from your wife, because you can see she's exhausted. So, we actually, well, sorry,
There's
I
a
grabbed
thought
both
experiment,
bags.
actually. I wonder if I was to have two bags, what I would take with me. There's a question, and that's
There's a
sort of the
question.
question you've probably thought about. Well,
I've
you've
done
had
that
to
one.
experience.
Yeah, a couple of pairs of underwear, a couple of pairs of socks, and my laptop. You know, um,
Fair enough.
yeah, I mean, we'd actually packed our suitcases, half packed them previously the night before. So we had a few change of clothes
Yeah.
there, but no, it wasn't much. There's not much. You grab your paperwork, you hopefully remember all of it. Um, you understand that you're going to forget things.
Yeah.
um, and that's the way it goes. But yeah, sorry, I was saying, the guy and girl carried their or the Diedushka babushka carried their belongings over the up to the border and all that, and the guy's just got tears coming down his face. Tears of just thankfulness. And it was funny. I remember saying, it's okay, everything's okay, it's all right. You're going to get across. Not realizing myself was going to be doing exactly the same thing 12 hours later when the first load of volunteers from Romania managed to get across the border and bring food and water. you know, you, um, and you're thinking, you're like, well, I'm a grown man. I'm, big and
Yeah.
strong and tough and things like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, when the Romanians crossed the border, understanding that it was going to take themselves 24 hours to at least cross back over again, and then they
Yeah.
were getting more food and drink and crossing back and just doing this. Um, you just think how amazing humanity is in that regard. The people of Romania were just fantastic. You know, People can comment. I made a post once in one of the videos about, someone saying Romania wasn't giving much. It's like they don't have to. The amount of Ukrainian refugees that are going to be forever grateful to the
Yeah.
kindness and compassion shown.
And yeah, this is
Mhm.
this is some of the comeback about Orban and Hungary as well. Is that and Poland, all these nations around here, that
Mm.
actually is not accounted for necessarily in the cost of the aid packages that they sent
Oh
to
yeah,
Ukraine.
yeah.
It's the sheer volume of people, refugees that have crossed the borders and are being looked after, that a huge drain on resources, time, and effort, and everything of the people there, and that is something that other nations, the US, UK, France, Germany, to some extent, although they are somewhat closer, but they just
Mm.
haven't had to experience it to the same volumes as these
Yeah.
countries, and the kindness that individuals or like
Oh,
masses of locals have shown has at times been mind blowing.
there's the memory set in my mind, of seeing all the Romanians once we crossed the border, standing there in the snow with food, with clothing, with anything that they could give you or help you with, and they're standing in the snow doing this to help their fellow human. And again, as like living in Kharkiv, we had coming across that border. I was helping Nigerians across the border.
Mm,
I was helping Indians, Pakistanis. There were English, there were French, there were German. Everyone from every country, you know,
mm,
was going through that border. And so whilst people, or some people, especially a lot of Australians, kind of have this idea of the war's a long way away, it doesn't impact us or something like that. I think people would actually be surprised at how many refugees um, from around the world actually came out of Ukraine.
yeah.
And what was a African with definitely black color skin managing to do living in a Nazi infested country. you know
Yeah,
um
yes, yeah.
let's look
Something
at it.
something tells me the disinformation is at play.
Yeah.
So you're in Romania, and then I take it there's quite some effort to get to the next sort of place,
Yeah,
and then
we
obviously back to.
we actually had the Australian government very kindly put us up in a hotel for 2 nights right on the border.
Right.
And that was a godsend. And I swear
Yeah.
they looked at me and they were like, "Oh no, we've got to debrief him, but boy, I wish he'd have a shower first." You know,
Yeah.
it's a lot of days on the road by that point. It must have looked like absolute hell. Um, but we actually got some really important information out of it for things like communications with the government. It's like at times of crisis, well, the Australian government was still using a phone line. um, Well, that's all well and good, but do you know how hard it is to phone another country and get put on hold for 40 minutes because for some reason there's only one number, one emergency number. So people who were trying to find out about relatives in Ukraine were also the same people in Ukraine. They were calling the same number. So you were getting put
Yeah.
on hold, but you couldn't keep a mobile signal. You're driving, or, there's, once you got to the border, well, there's thousands of other people trying to make phone calls as well. But we could have Telegram conversations without a problem. So we're saying things like, you should have Telegram, WhatsApp, in these emergency situations, set up those numbers, get them set up, give us different means of communication.
When you first said Telegram there, because I'm so old fashioned, I was like, you were making Telegram messages? What? They were Telegram, Telegram. Yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
social media app, of course.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So something like that to enable people to actually communicate back and forth, because we were getting different ideas as well from the Australian government. So we were originally told someone would actually meet us on the Ukrainian side to help us get through. And then when we actually met the Australian representative, they were of course on the other side in Romania, and they went, oh no, there's no way in hell we're going over there. It's you know no way. um and there's the fear aspect too of, when you're in these queues. So when you are queuing for 3 days, unfortunately, myself, I'm quite a military history buff. It's a topic I've always enjoyed. Don't enjoy it anymore. I've now realized they're real people dying. So it's,
Mm,
you know, um, but we're male. We all love the boy's own adventure in our minds. That's life. Um, but sitting there on that border, realizing that, yeah, you're all civilians, but wow, what a target. If there was just one cruise missile that had come in and hit us there, all the refugees would have gone flooding back into Ukraine, creating huge amounts of problems for Ukraine as a country. So your brain's sitting there going, well, militarily that makes sense. You can always say that the missile went off course or something like that, or whatever. um, you've got that aspect of it, so your brain's expecting, even though you're on the other side of the country, your brain's expecting a missile to come over the horizon. Or every time you heard a helicopter, your bowels clenched, your stomach drops. You're not expecting it to be a Ukrainian helicopter. And even to this day, when we hear helicopters go around us now, you've got that exact same PTSD feeling of crap, it's a helicopter. So goodness knows what the people in Ukraine are going to go through, with the years, um, in the coming years, the mental anguish that they're going to get.
yeah. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, eventually you get back to Australia, and
Oh,
you're kind of setting yourself up, and you set yourself up, yeah, and you're still setting yourself up
yeah,
with your new life there. I mean, you kind of touched on, I know I'm racing forward here, but you touched on like the psychological uh, experiences that you've had and scars that you've taken with you with regard to your experiences in
yeah.
Ukraine. Is
Um,
it this I presume, and I don't want to open any old wounds at all, but this is an ongoing process, I presume, of coming to terms.
yeah. Look, I've gone through the last year thinking I'm handling it fine. Okay, I don't like seeing
Yeah,
combat footage, but as I've said before, I love the way that you present it, because it's not all about how many people died, because I understand they're real people. Whatever side they're on, I don't particularly care. A lot of those Russians are just idiots, but they're still humans. I
yeah,
don't. I want to see them go home. I don't want to see them dead. You know. I think that's a very important difference
mm,
there. But yeah, I was actually having to do the start the paperwork for my wife's visa so she can stay, because got to love the Australian government. They've given refugees 3 years visa, but then they've still got to apply for a normal visa. So unfortunately, because my wife isn't in a sought after occupation of like a hairdresser, just just an engineer, we don't need them. Um, we have to somehow come up with $10,000 to apply for the visa process. Um, which, when you're trying to buy houses or even set up homes or something, you sit there going, how the hell are we meant to find $10,000 for this? Um, and yeah, so we're starting to do the paperwork for that. And I'm reading through my emails that I'd had with the Australian government before we'd left. And, that was it. That was taking me straight back to that fear moment,
Mm,
that we'd had in the build up, because uh, it was a month of build up of things getting more and more insane kind of thing. There was more warnings from the government coming in. We even had some government people trying to find flights for us to be able to get out of Ukraine. But of course, by the time they found them, they sent us that, and then the airport in Kharkiv had actually closed. So, you know, um, so there was a lot of fear on that. And I'm actually finally going off to see a counsellor on Thursday morning to discuss all that aspect, because yeah, it catches up with you. Um,
and it is odd, isn't it? I mean, there's so many manifestations or so many different forms of psychological impact that a war like this would have on children,
mm,
men, women in different ways, people who are fighting and experiencing death and warfare and first-hand explosions and stuff, people who are civilians experiencing explosions, fleeing, stress, and all these. There are so many different ways that this whole
yeah,
war is just going to be
and
impacting people.
the interesting thing, what I'm always amazed at, because I know myself, my work output has dropped. Nowhere near as productive as I used to be. But then
Mm,
I watch my wife somehow manage to sit there for, you know, doing the same amount of productivity, and I go, how? How do you do that? How does your mind not keep going back and back and
mm.
reliving things and things like that? This amazing Ukrainian ability to do that, where us soft Westerners, no.
Do you think, I mean, sometimes I hear these blanket statements about things like Russians are like this, Ukrainians are like this. Ukrainians, like someone earlier, Ukrainians are warm and friendly, and Ukrainians are X. And I, I never quite know how to take that, whether that's can be accurate, whether an entire peoples can be either tarred with the same brush or painted beautifully with the same brush. Are there
No.
characteristics that you think Ukrainians have generally, or are we all just people with the same kind of varieties in different nations? That's a little bit
Um,
philosophical.
no, no, no. I can answer this in two ways. One, as I said before, I've never had a problem in Ukraine. Never. Never had a fight. Never. Here you go. All right. Scenario for you. If you remember Euro 2012,
Mm,
okay, I was in Kiev and it was England versus Ukraine was on so we're in this restaurant, big TV. I'm wearing an England t-shirt. I'm
right.
in a pub full of Ukrainians. Okay. The people I was with are like, we should probably go. If England's going to win this, we should be going out the door. England won the game. I thought, ooh, it's going to get interesting now. I had two gentlemen come up, shake my hand, buy me a beer, and say thank you for the game. Would that happen in a pub in England?
Well, absolutely not. No, there's no doubt about that. Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. So, warm and friendly, yes, definitely. Warm and friendly. You've got assholes. You've got assholes in
yeah,
every country. You
yeah.
know, um, but say beautiful country, just the people were beautiful, and I think again, it's indicative of the people. When you're all struggling, you're all helping each other. It's only when you've got something to protect that you become an asshole and say no, 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 no. If you talk, if you look at all our societies and things like that, it's only once someone's got £1 million in the bank do they want to stop paying taxes. Before
Yeah,
that, they understood that they have to pay taxes.
yeah.
So the more we got, of course, the more we want to hold on to. So yeah, every country's got assholes, but the Ukrainians were nice. They were also highly educated. Okay, a lot
Yeah,
more
there's a
Ukrainians
lot of
go to
talk about this,
university.
about there being a general level of education and also IT
Yeah,
savviness, such that actually they are, yeah, they're in a good position perhaps to be able to rebuild and reconstruct it in a way maybe that other nations might struggle
look,
more with. I don't know.
they're smart, and as I said, look, where we were living, I couldn't throw a stone without hitting an engineer or a programmer.
Yeah.
They're just everywhere. My business in Ukraine, we were employing quite a few programmers over there. They were just good. They were good. They did their work. They didn't complain. They weren't knocking on your door every week for a pay rise or something like that. In fact, I found uh, giving them holidays to Bulgaria or something was a hell of a lot better than giving them a pay rise. As funny as that sounds, but if you send a guy and his family off to Bulgaria for 2 weeks, that's worth $10,000 a year to them.
Yeah.
So
Elmer Hess here saying, I can recall, as a German here, I can recall watching the semi-final 1990 between England and Germany. I remember watching that on the
I
TV
remember that one
as
too. Yes.
as a nipper in a pub in London. I kept a very low profile then. I'm sure you did. Yeah, yeah. So, I guess as we kind of meander towards
Yep.
some kind of ending with a view to there's so much more to talk about, let's have another chat type thing,
Yep.
if you're
Yep.
cool with that.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. Yeah.
So you are now in Australia.
Yep.
There's a few things I want to ask you about. One, what's you and particularly your wife's opinion about Russian people now? And I say that because she's Ukrainian from the background you've already
Mhm.
told me. What are your opinions about Russian people and about Russia now? How what when you see a Russian person in real life, do you just you can't help it? Do you have are there emotions evoked in you of anger
Yeah.
or what?
Yeah. Look, this is one for my shrink. Yeah. No.
Yeah, no, let's have it in public, like across the world.
Look, you have this fantasy of doing horrible, violent crime
Mm,
against them. Um, I'm not going to lie about that. I've been honest all the way through. Why start lying now?
mm,
No, me, my wife is much too genteel for this, but no, you fantasize about what if I skin a couple of them alive or something like that.
mm,
What type of outrage would that send back to Russia? We're going to start doing horrific crimes to Russians around the world. Would that make them actually understand that what they're doing is wrong? Of course, then the rational brain kicks in, and says, no, no, that wouldn't solve anything. And, you just end up in jail, and then, you've got a family to support and all that type of thing. So, damn the rational brain. But I did actually have a guy, I said to you before, a guy down the road, I'd actually been buying some secondhand electronic equipment. And
this is in Australia.
this is in Australia, just he lives less than a kilometer from me. Um, he opened the door. I said, "Oh, where's the accent from?" Because you could hear it, and especially considering how things are going now. He's like, "Oh, well, guess," but I could see the Russian flag in the background, so I spoke Russian to him. Um, and that's actually the first time I've spoken Russian since I've been in Australia, and since. And he's like, "Oh, you speak Russian? Oh, how do you speak Russian?" Da 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 da. I switched back to English and said, "Look, I was living in Ukraine. I was living in Kharkiv. Da 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 da. And he's like, "Oh, Kharkiv, that's a good Russian city," And I'm just like, I just said, "Mate, I'm here to do business. If you keep talking like this, I'm going to put my fist right through your face." And I mean this in the politest way. Here's my money. Give me the goods. Um, and I was shaking because you're suddenly confronted with something that you don't want to be confronted by. Now, my
Mhm.
wife went to TAFE over here, which is equivalent in the UK to your local college. I'm trying to think of the right word, but yeah, to do
Like
English
a
lessons.
yeah, like a sixth form college or maybe secondary
Yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah.
Adult
Adult,
education.
adult education. Yeah.
FE.
Um, And I mean, don't get me wrong, she's spoken English for 8 years or something like that. But there's always that translation layer that goes on in my head, between her version of English and my version of English, which changes depending on who I'm talking to. If I'm speaking to an Englishman, my English changes. If I'm speaking to an Australian, it changes. If I'm speaking to an American, it changes. Um, so, but she's learning English there. And they had 5 or 6 Ukrainian refugees, and they put a Russian lady in the class with them. And your brain just sits there going, "How stupid are you people?" You know, this is someone whose country's killing these people. Wouldn't you just sit there in the office and go, "Hey, maybe this isn't a good idea"? Now, I've got to say, somehow that Russian lady is still walking. That's a lot more control than I would have been able to do. I probably would have objected or something like that to the college to say, this is not good. They're murdering our people at the moment. Um, so my wife is takes a lot different, but then she still speaks Russian with her friends. They try and speak Ukrainian when they can, but of course the east of Ukraine, Russian was the language, so it depends on where you
Mm,
come from in Ukraine and what you're
mm.
comfortable in. um, so my wife is now finally thinking in English, rather than translating it in your head.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And my son has started to say Aussie ocarisms, so he's settling in quite well. But
He'll
look,
be fine.
he'll be fine. We got really lucky. The community here actually put him into a private school, just so he could have a bit more TLC, while he
Wow,
uh, adjusts and things like that. So we've had a year and a half of free private school education over here, which
wow.
ends at this year. But we got to say it's been just amazing because there's the cultural change, there's the language change, and there's the psychological damage that he's been through.
Mm.
So you know um, I mean, his biggest complaints are being able to play online with his friends, which are, scattered around the world. So they're always dealing with different time zones. And, I've got friends, he's got friends in Canada that he wants to play online with or something like that. So they're his biggest vocalized issues. But, years to come, there's going to be a lot of issues there,
Yeah.
even down to the fact that, he hasn't seen his dad in 18, 19 months or something.
Which brings me on to sort of one of the final areas of this, which is, are you going to want to go? Do you want to go back to Ukraine?
I can say I would love to go back to Ukraine. My wife is now, and as you saw the map, Kharkiv is a long way from the sea. We live 500 meters from the beach. And if you know anything about people who grew up inland, once they're by the sea, they're never going to move.
Yeah, but we're talking about Australia, mate. There's like everywhere you look, something's going to hurt you. Like it's going to be
There is.
some kind of animal that attack you.
Yeah, well, there's sharks over there. There's poisonous snakes over there, and
Deal with it. Yeah, fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah, and the spiders keep trying to come in, but but in all seriousness, say we've got the poisonous snakes down the road. No one's ever seen one. The sharks off the coast. Well, she's I think 3 times now the dolphins have come to swim with them. You
Oh
know,
wow.
I'm sorry, where the hell do you get that?
Yeah.
Where the wild dolphins come in to play with you, you know,
Yeah.
um, and steal your ball. If you've got a ball, they've stolen it. So yeah, you can't beat Aussie beaches for sure. And we're living not far from an island called Penguin Island, which strangely is populated with penguins. So again, that's an animal that you don't get in the northern hemisphere. So
Yeah.
no, no, they're southern hemisphere only penguins.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Yeah. So,
I get to see these things. So she doesn't particularly want to go back, and we keep thinking about unexploded munitions, the rebuild time for the country. You're looking 5 years or we'll say 5 years to get rid of most of the landmines or something like that. So there's a long time before it's safe. You as a parent to take your child back to that type of environment. I mean,
mm.
and I'm not judging anyone, but what type of person are you, or what type of parent are you, if you'll say, I'm now going to take my kids back to this minefield infested area
I
or
guess
unexplored wilderness?
that's gonna change for a lot of people depending on their
Mm,
connections back in the nation and also how
yeah,
well integrated they are. I mean, the difference is if you're married to an indigenous person, I say
yes,
indigenous, of course, that's a loaded
yeah,
term in terms of Australia, but
yep,
like if you're married to someone from the country that you're staying in, then that's a whole different kettle of fish than from being maybe a
yeah,
single parent mother or someone without children or dependents living somewhere kind of somewhat temporarily and then working out whether you're going to go back or not. So I guess it's horses for
mm,
courses for a lot of people, but I
yeah.
fully understand.
So I'd love to go back. I loved Ukraine. I really loved it as a country. Um, Being in Australia, and I'm going to get hated by all the Aussies here, but we're all fat and lazy over here. Whenever I feel like I'm putting on weight, I just go for a walk down the local shops and realize that I'm really anorexic compared to the rest of the population. Um, I know that makes me a horrible person, but yeah.
Harsh because it's quite a sporty nation, but there you
Well,
go.
it is, but no, we are. When you go to the doctor or something like that now and he takes your weight, he actually goes, oh, you're underweight. It's like, well, I didn't used to be according to the national average 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's the fact that we're all getting fatter as a
Mm,
country. So well, you don't have that in Ukraine. I used to walk to the shops every day in Ukraine because the shops were close, but the society was also set up for that, whereas in Australia society is set up for driving everywhere.
yeah.
So there's differences there. You had a lot more community in Ukraine. Um, when we were here first trying to find a house to live in, and I was trying to talk to the real estate guy saying, well, we don't have a rental history. First of all, when living in Australia, I own my own house. So, there's definitely no rental history there. My wife has always owned her property because it came through her parents. Um, so there's no rental history. So how are we meant to get in here? And the guy's like, well, I don't care. Not my problem. He
Yeah.
goes, just go buy a tent and pitch it in down the park. I'm just like, fuck, Australia's changed. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not asking for anything special. I'm asking for some advice on how to do this.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
there's aspects of it.
yeah, so yeah, and that goes back to the idea of what Ukraine is and how it might be different from other nations, and there's
Mm.
still that community feel, something that has been lost in the modernization of the UK and many of our nations that we talk about. But maybe there's still that kind of old school aspect to Ukraine where you do have these
There's an
geographical communities still.
old-fashioned there's an old-fashioned, uh, ethics value, which you get the sexist version of it in Russia. The women are weak, the men are strong, women are meant to be out in the home or something like that. Ukraine is more of a understanding that a marriage is a partnership. Although I have warned my wife, don't ever use the word weak woman. If you ever say that phrase weak woman, I'm walking out of the room because
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
interesting. That was used the other day in the EU, and they had a Russian
yeah,
politician who mentioned that, and there's some people in the threads were saying actually it's a kind of like a phrase that's maybe not quite translated correctly, and there's an aspect of that, but
it
yeah,
is. Yeah, look. Everyone knows. We're not doing marriage guidance or anything here, but everyone knows that both sexes have strengths and weaknesses, and you know, mm, couples try and muddle their way through. But Ukraine is a bit more traditional.
yeah,
I've had conversations with my wife about lesbians or gay men or something like that, and she's never experienced that. And I've got friends in Australia that are both lesbian and gay, and I've always just used the mentality, and I say it with her is, well, they don't ask you what you do in the bedroom,
yeah,
so
yeah,
why
and
is what
that's
they do
yeah,
important,
and a lot of that is normalization through,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, you experience it. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, Not necessarily the sexual acts, but
yeah,
the
yeah,
people
yeah.
that you're with. And yeah, so just trying to explain some old-fashioned values like that to
Which is
show that it's
interesting
not
though,
the
because
end of the
actually
world.
there is some changes afoot in Ukraine. So I was
Yeah.
reading recently about sort of gay marriage is something that is
Yep.
on the agenda now, and yeah,
Yeah.
as the kind of integration, I suppose, with European values
Yeah.
and
You
so on.
gotta you gotta look at it like Russia, sorry, Poland, Ukraine, very strong religion countries,
Yeah,
and your religion very definitely says, or used to say for most religions, that you're allowed to do, you know, you, you're not meant to have same-sex relations or anything like that. So it's the really strong religious countries. They are still really strong religious, um, but that's going away.
yeah, it's
That's
interesting.
fading
God,
away.
there's so much I want to talk to you now, but we're sort of running out of time with
Yeah.
regard to the
Yes. Yes.
Orthodox Church. You know, the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. There's so much to
Mm.
talk about that, but
All I can ever say on that one is I remember going in an Orthodox Russian church, and the lady I was with at the time had to put the scarf on, and she wouldn't have been allowed in there if she was having her period. And I just
yeah.
sat there going, "What? You don't get access to God when you've got your period?" Like, sorry, that was something that I'd never even thought of before, and it was, yeah, that was how orthodox it was. God doesn't speak to women for 7 days of the month.
Yeah, interesting.
Um, so yeah,
Just to kind of wrap things up here, you
yep,
you are in a better place, than obviously you were in as you were trying to escape from
yeah,
Kharkiv, and you're in a better place now, but you have things, psychological ramifications of your whole
yeah,
experience that you're still dealing with, and you will continue to deal with. Do you know people back um, in Ukraine that are
yeah,
from where you live, friends, family? How do they
yep.
feel about everything going on at
We've
the moment?
got so my stepfather's back there. We've got friends who um, he wouldn't leave his father. His father wouldn't leave Kharkiv, but his wife went over to France. So you can imagine how well that marriage is going at the moment. As so we've got friends there. We've got friends that are serving. We've got friends that are volunteering. There's a whole mix in there. Um, you know, you get messages of someone being very happy that they've done some bad things to Russian people.
Mm,
Don't get me wrong, they're a soldier, but then you've also got another soldier who's regretful but saying the same things. But all of these people were not soldiers by choice.
mm,
Okay, um, they didn't over the past 10 years or 8 years of the war, and say 10 years or something like that, there was no aspect of them wanting to be in the military. They've all been forced to become soldiers. They've all been forced to stop their lives. Um, and fight, and that most of them don't want to. Most of them don't want, you know, they will, and they'll volunteer to do it so their kids don't have to fight again. And that's one thing that I think Russia really didn't take into account is Ukraine remembers. Ukraine remembers being invaded back in 1919. You know, Ukraine remembers being starved, by Stalin because he couldn't control the country. Um, Ukraine remembers all of this, and they know what they don't want. And in all honesty, take being a cat among the pigeons here. Take Northern Ireland and Ireland. You know, there's no good solution there. The UK is never going to impose. If you go back in time, rule over the country. They're going to be constantly rebelling. So even if Russia managed to win this war is going to drag on for another 50 years, of
And this is,
people.
yeah, this is where there's so much conversation to be had, and it's all the usual topics that I talk about, which is
Mm,
Russia can't win. There's literally no way they can win because you cannot take now that they can't depose a government in Kiev. And sorry to those people that have heard me say this 100 times, but the original intention was a special military operation. It literally was an
yeah,
SMO for the Russians. We're going to go in, change the government, get rid of Zelensky, either kill him or he'll flee, and change the government, and then go out. Job done. Thank you very
yeah,
much. However, they were resisted straight away. They were stuck in Ukraine, therefore, with a massive army. They couldn't do this deposing the government, and they didn't have a plan B. So if you can't do that, if you want to continue with that plan A, that means
mm,
occupying the massive country that Ukraine is, right? Occupying that country and then having all the troops in order to do that, which is like a staggering number of people to occupy a country of that
yeah.
size with 44 million people, then then that's impossible. So if you correct this,
Yep.
Russia cannot do that, and since they
Well,
can't do that, they're stuck in this limbo of like, well, what are you going to do? What are your
well,
intentions?
I mean, history tells us Russia couldn't do that back in the 1920s slash 30s, which is why they starved the country.
Yeah,
That was how they got control in the end. You go back to the stories of Stefan Banderas and all that the Russians seem to hate. Um, you know, well, they were freedom fighters because they'd just been starved. You know, and controlling a country the size of Ukraine is just impossible.
yeah,
But I want to say this as well because Ukraine's getting a lot of criticism over time over the counterattack being wrong and things like that. Um, is we keep being told what NATO would do,
yeah,
and I just really want to point out that NATO's never fought Russia, but Ukraine survived. What day are we on now? 500 and whatever it is.
yeah,
NATO said that Ukraine wouldn't last 3 days. So this
yeah,
is this is NATO's been wargaming this for a long, long time. They've
mm,
planned everything, and they said 3 days. That's all it's going to take. And NATO says we could crush Russia quickly. Well, I'd like to point out how wrong they were. With the invasion there. So how wrong could they possibly be if NATO went into a hot war with Russia?
yeah,
Ignoring nukes. You know.
yeah,
We don't know. So while we got all these analysts saying, all this wonderful thing about, uh, Ukraine's not doing as fast or not being as good as we would be, because we are wonderful. It's like, well, how do you
because
know?
we would have spent a
You know,
month destroying the front line in terms of aerial
well,
bombardments, taking out
that's
all your
that's
targets.
yeah, but that's what they say they do. But remember, Russia has a huge air force,
Yeah,
still has a huge air
yeah,
force, has a hell of a lot of ground-to-air missiles. I'm not saying NATO couldn't do it. I just think it would take a lot longer, and there'd be a lot higher cost than what NATO would like the world to believe. You
well,
know,
yeah. So it's this stage of the counteroffensive, which is your stage of, well, they've gone back a stage in my opinion. So they tried to do
Mm,
the attacks with the combined arms and maneuver warfare, and they lost a
yeah,
bunch of equipment in that first week. And then like, right, let's not do that. we obviously need to take out all of their artillery, and we would have done that by air if we had air superiority, but we don't have that. So we're going to have to do that by HIMARS and
Yeah,
artillery. So now you've got an extended phase that will last as long as it lasts until there ain't any of that stuff left.
that's that's it exactly. And as I said before, Ukrainians are smart people, and they care about each other. And you see that in a lot of their videos. They're not going to be needlessly trying to throw away their soldiers, and it's just going to take time. And as
Yeah.
as a country, it just needs our support for longer. And the one other thing there is whilst we say NATO would do this and NATO would do that, remember NATO's got the latest equipment. NATO's not giving Ukraine the latest equipment. It's still 20, 30 years old equipment. Even the javelins that they were giving before the war, a lot of them had passed expiry date. You know,
Mm,
or effective expiry date or something like that. So,
mm.
it's not getting the equipment that it needs. And whether that's intentional or not by the West, I have no idea. I'm not privy to that type of thing. I'm not that intelligent. But, we could be doing a lot more, all of our governments. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to non-US governments, we just don't have the equipment ourselves in a lot of
No,
cases. So the
no.
thing about the US is they've spent gazillions of dollars over a very long time
Yeah.
creating huge amounts of equipment. And I was speaking to my mate again, who's a tank commander, who said that and I've mentioned this on previous threads and about in
Mm,
Iraq. He was out in Iraq, and the Americans are like, "We're going to bury a load of our equipment because we got so much of it, and it's too expensive to take home." And
mm,
other people on the threads are like, "No, I think that's a way of preserving the equipment in case there's another conflict out there, and they could then pick it back up." But my mate was like, "No, no, no. They literally
mm.
just did a cost benefit analysis and said it is cheaper for us to
Yeah,
bury a bunch of Bradleys and Abrams tanks and whatever it was under the sand in Iraq. It's cheaper for us to do that than to fly it all back out there. So probably they decommissioned it, but
well,
they'll like
yeah,
when you've got that much equipment that you can, like the British are like, we've only got 6 tanks, so they're all definitely coming back or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So, but
yeah,
that's not a criticism of anyone or anything. That's just there are two different situations going on here. You've got the America that've
mm,
got loads of equipment and they've got loads in warehouses, and you got say the British who've got no equipment because of underfunding and a different,
yeah,
relying on NATO and all this, and then saying, right, okay, we want to support Ukraine, we just can't give them our stuff because we've got not
yeah.
enough. So it's
But
about
but
going around the
but
world and
the
buying things.
the like the look, the amazing thing about countries like England, for argument's sake, I don't even know how many Challenger tanks they've got, but when's the last time you've seen a tank, battalion come over the horizon and attack England? You know, we don't need them.
Yeah,
Ship
we've
them all off. You know,
yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so there are all these different sort of considerations, but
Mm,
it would be great if just they're willing to do the fighting, just give them everything, and
mm.
we're back to the kind of conversations we have every day, of
Yes,
course.
yes, yes. And I'd just like to point out for chat, when I say we, I'm allowed to say we because I actually pay taxes in both countries. So, that gives me a right to say we, and citizenship, of course, for both countries. So, yeah,
Well, you're allowed to say that. Um,
I'm allowed to say
uh,
that. So,
so I guess that brings us to the end. I know we kind of rushed a
mhm.
little bit of talking at the end here, but just to let people get on with their day. I know it's going
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
late with you as well. Look, thank you so much for sharing your
Mhm,
experiences and giving us an insight as an Australian into Ukraine and through your wife vicariously through into
mhm.
citizenship of Ukraine and then your experiences of leaving. I really do appreciate that. Are you up for another chat at some point, and we
Yeah,
can like pick
I
up where
am.
we
Yeah.
left off and talk about like some Q&A on some war stuff as well?
Yeah, and look, I'd like to just apologize for this not happening earlier. As you know, I had computer problems, major computer problems. So I'd love to plug my Asus laptop that I actually lugged out of Ukraine, but it did die just out of warranty, so I can't,
Ah,
you know, I can't give them a plug, you know. But yeah, so apologies for it not happening earlier, and thank you for letting me come in here and share my story, and just really show that uh, the people in Ukraine aren't people in Ukraine. They're people the same as me, you know. Um, it's pure luck on what side of a border we get born on, you know. Um,
this
yeah,
is so true. Man, I could. There's a lot of philosophy that I'd love to dip into there because I've literally written articles
yeah,
on. Well, I've written a chapter in a book on the accident of birth, like of
yeah.
literally like you can be born into this country or that country, and there's something. So a philosopher, John Rawls, talked about the veil of ignorance, which is like, how would you set out moral laws? Would you set them out differently if you didn't know how you were going to be born and where you're going to be born? So this idea that
Mm,
like, would you have? So normally people say, I think we should have rules, and basically, what people suggest are rules that suit them, right?
yeah, of
Like
course.
rules that are
Yeah.
beneficial to them. You're like, but what if
Mm,
you were disabled? And so the veil of ignorance says that you don't know how you're going to be born or where you're going to be born. How
mm,
do you think? How do you think the world should be set out? And how do you think rules should
yeah.
be set out? And of course, if you don't know, if you're going to be born disabled or male or female or cognitively impaired or living this side of that border or that side of the border, how
Mhm.
do you think the world should be?
How
Anyway,
to
this
and
is
look, that would be really interesting just to say, to come back and do that exercise every 5 years and map
interesting.
your
Yeah,
change as a human, the growth of you as a human, you know, when you're
yeah,
young and angry compared to when you're old and you've seen a lot, and you know, you're like, yeah, things change, your mind changes.
yeah,
And of course, on comparison of how successful your life's been, you know, because
yeah.
if
This
you're
is true.
bitter, then you know, you got different points of view.
This is
So
very
yeah,
true.
really interesting. Okay, I'm off topic. Sorry.
No, no, that's
Yeah.
fine. That's good. No, 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 I love it. But can I just say thank you to Sal Vodka and Lawrence for their super chats. Really, really
Oh,
appreciate that for their kindness.
mm,
Really, really great. Thank you all to the lively chatting on the sidelines, including a discussion that even I got involved in on
oh.
the terminology for sandals, whether it's sandals, thongs, jandals, all these different ones coming from around the world. Um, uh, I,
Don't
I,
don't get that word confused for thongs and thongs in
yeah,
Ukraine.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
It can mean different things. Don't try and wear it in that way. Like is all
Yep.
I'm saying. No, really appreciate the super chat. Thank you, Sam
Thanks,
Vodka,
Sarah.
again. Good luck
Yeah.
with the 801 visa, Matt. Top
Yeah.
guest. Thanks so much. And take care, everybody, and all the best to you, Matt. I look forward to interacting with you in the comments threads, as I spend far too
Excellent.
much time doing. And we'll have another chat for sure, mate. If you're cool.
Definitely.
And last words over to
Definitely.
you.
Uh, Nothing, just thank you everyone for listening to this old man doing his rambling. So yeah.
Nice one. Ramble on, guys.
Right.
Ramble on. To quote the great Led
Cheers.
Zeppelin. All the best.
Right. Bye bye.